Hello, all. Welcome to the MA Mentor. We are on our second, technically third installment of the Anatomy and Physiology series. So we are going to jump right into it. Today we are covering the skeletal system. So let's go ahead and get ready. There we go. And as always, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my channel so I can continue to bring you quality information and we can have a little fun and I can just keep making this content. It means a lot to me. So let's go ahead and get started with the skeletal system. So the skeletal system is basically the body's framework. Okay, it holds everything together, keeps us standing upright, allows us to move, and all done with a mere 206 bones. That's it. Functions of the skeletal system, as I said, framework for the body, so it adds support. If we did not have the skeletal system, we would just be a pile of goo on the floor. It protects our underlying kind of softer organs, aids in cell production. So bone marrow produces red blood cells, red bone marrow does. Also helps to store minerals such as calcium. I'm sure when you were a kid, your parents or your grandparents or whatever always said, "Oh, drink your milk, get your calcium for strong bones." That is partially true. It helps with storage. It also serves the system itself serves as an attachment for muscles. So on many of our bones, there's actually sites for attachment of muscles, and the muscles are what enables the bones to move. So there is two divisions of the skeletal system as a whole. We have what's called the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton consists of 80 bones. Basically, it's the head and the trunk, if you want to look at it that way. So it's the skull, the thoracic cage or the rib cage, and the vertebral column. That is your axial skeleton. The appendicular skeleton, the second division, is pretty much everything else. And that's the remaining 126 bones. Upper limbs, lower limbs, the pectoral girdle, which is everything up here that kind of allows our arms to attach, and then the pelvic girdle, which is the lower part of our body, which allows for attachment of the legs. So let's start with the skull. The skull is made up of several different bones that all kind of come together to make the shape of our skull. Looking from a frontal or a interior view, you have literally the frontal bone here, the sphenoid bones, which are these blue ones in here. And I love that they color coded this. It makes it so much easier to look at. The ethmoid bone, which is right behind basically where your nose is. Single bone, notice it says unpaired. The sphenoid bone, unpaired as well. The frontal bone, unpaired as well. But then when you get to the side, if you look at the side view, the parietal bone and the temporal bones are all paired. They have one on each side of the head. And then in the back, we have the occipital bone. Okay. And like I said, if you notice, there are a lot more bones of the face. However, this is mostly just the skull. And if you notice, they kind of come together to form, say, like the orbit of the eye. All right, the vertebral column. This is what most people refer to as the spine. Okay. The vertebral column is there to protect the spinal cord. The spinal cord in and of itself is not very strong and could be easily damaged or even severed if there was not bone surrounding it. So what we have in the vertebral column, it is divided up into sections, basically. So you have the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine, the sacrum, and then the coccygeal or coccyx. Okay. The way to remember how many is in each. Now notice you've got 7 cervical vertebra. You've got 12 thoracic and then 5 lumbar. Sacral and coccyx bones they technically have and are divided into numbers of bones, but they're fused together. So very oftentimes you just see it referred to as the sacrum or the coccyx, of course, being your tailbone. So the best way to remember the number of the vertebral columns is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You eat breakfast around 7 a.m., lunch at noon, dinner at 5. Best way to remember those. And then there are 5 sacral bones that are fused together, and then 3 to 5 coccyx that are fused together. Again, those are usually not referred to in that way. The number of the various parts of the vertebral column, though, if you've ever seen, say, a CT scan or an X-ray or something like that, that says they had damage at the like T6, that's what they're referring to. Is if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the thoracic spine, because T for thoracic, that's the particular bone that they are referring to. Okay, the rib cage. Let's take a look at the rib cage real quick. So up here, you've got the clavicle or the collarbone. Okay. That is not part of the rib cage. However, that is part of the pectoral girdle which allows for attachment of all of this. The rib cage itself, or the thoracic cage, is just made up of the sternum, which is the breastbone, so to speak. Most people call it that. And then the various ribs. Okay, the sternum is actually divided into 3 separate parts. The manubrium, which is this top part here, the kind of bulkier part. The body of the sternum, and then the little pointy end is called the xiphoid process. Okay. We also have various ribs. There are 12 ribs in all. They are divided, however, into true ribs, false ribs, and floating ribs. Let me show you how that works. So from 1 to 7, you have true ribs. True because they are directly attached to the sternum via cartilage. Okay, and it's called costal cartilage because it refers to the ribs. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 directly attach via cartilage to the sternum. That's why they're called true ribs. 8 to 10 do not attach directly to the sternum via cartilage. They connect to cartilage, but then that cartilage connects into a bigger piece of cartilage that eventually reaches the sternum. So that is why those are called false ribs. And then the last 2, 11 and 12, are called floating ribs because they don't have any attachment to the sternum at all. They are only attached in the back, like the rest of them, to the vertebral column. Here is the bones of the arms and the hands. Again, noticing that the clavicle and the scapula, which is the shoulder blade, are noted here as well because they are a point of attachment. Okay. Here is the humerus, which is the bone of the upper arm. Here is the radius and the ulna. Those are the 2 bones of the lower arm or the forearm. The radius, if you have your hand like this, is the thumb side, and then the ulna is on the pinky side. You have then 8 small bones of the wrist called carpals, metacarpals, which are the bones of the hand, so this part of the hand, and then phalanges, which are the fingers. Of the lower limbs, we have the pelvis in here because that is the pelvic girdle, which allows for attachment, not part of the legs though. You have the femur, which is the largest bone in the body, quite honestly. That is the large thigh bone. You have the patella, which is what we mostly refer to as the kneecap. You have the fibula, which is the smaller kind of lateral bone of the lower leg. And then the tibia, which is the larger of the 2 lower leg bones, that is more medial and actually forms what we call our shin. Okay. You then have the small bones of the ankle called the tarsals. The metatarsals are the bones of the feet, and then the toes are called phalanges as well. So phalanges for the fingers, phalanges for the toes. You just have to know what you are referring to and take that all in context, of course. All right, there's some skeletal structure terms that I want you to be familiar with or that are good to be familiar with. The condyle. The condyle is the rounded end that articulates with another bone. And by articulate, that means move together. Okay. So usually in a joint. The crest is kind of a narrow or ridge-like edge. We see that in our pelvis up at the top. That's a crest. The epicondyle is the projection that is above the condyle. A foramen is an opening through a bone. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these, most bones have, but not all. Okay. A foramen is an opening in the bone. Probably the most prevalent is the foramen magnum, that is the big hole that is at the base of the skull, so our spinal cord can run through that. A fossa is a deep area or a depression, most notable in our pelvis. If you look at the pelvic bone where it's kind of not hollowed, but pushed in, that's a depression. A head of a bone is a rounded, enlarged area at the end of the bone. A process is anything that projects out of the bone. Sutures are an area where the two bones come together, so most notably in the skull, because our skull isn't one big bone, it's several bones that are connected or kind of squished together in an area, what they call a suture. A trochanter is a very large process. We see that at the top of the hip or the where the femur hits connects with the hip. A tubercle is a small kind of knobby process, and then a tuberosity is a larger knobby process. Okay, let's look at types of bones. So we have the types of bones are flat bones, long bones, short bones, irregular bones, and sesamoid bones. So here's some examples here. A flat bone would be like the frontal bone in the skull. That is a flat bone, which makes sense. It's flat. A short bone is any bone that is wider than it is long. So the bones of the wrist, the carpals, perfect example of a short bone. An irregular bone is literally that. It's a bone that really doesn't fall into any other category because of its shape. A vertebra is a perfect example of an irregular bone. A long bone is a bone that is longer than it is wide. So the opposite of a short bone. The femur is a good example of that. And then a sesamoid bone is any bone that is kind of rounded like the patella. And the reason it's called a sesamoid is because it is sesame-like. It's like a sesame seed. Okay, so that is all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you in part 2, where we will talk a little bit more in depth on how bones are created, and we will go into the various disorders and fractures. So have a good day, and I will see you in part 2.